I led a hunting party. Something in the forest started calling us. I'm going to be honest about what kind of man I was when this happened, because if I clean myself up for the telling, you won't understand why any of it went the way it did. I was 34, and I had been lying about my life for approximately 3 years. Not about anything dramatic, just the slow, cumulative dishonesty of a man who peaked in one context and couldn't admit that the context had closed. In college, I'd been the guy who organized things. Camping trips, road trips, the annual canoe marathon on the Wabash that became a minor legend in our friend group. I was the one with the gear, the plan, the checklist, the calm voice when someone flipped a canoe or got too drunk to set up a tent. It was the only version of myself I'd ever liked. By 34, most of the group had dispersed into marriages and mortgages and kids and cities that weren't close to each other. I was in Louisville, selling flooring for a regional distributor, living in half a duplex with a landlord who mowed at 6 in the morning. I hadn't organized anything in 2 years. But when people asked, and people always ask, because small talk requires it, I still described myself as the outdoors guy, the guy who disappears into the backcountry every chance he gets. In reality, the last time I'd been in actual wilderness was a 3-night trip to Red River Gorge with my brother, and I'd twisted my ankle on day 1 and spent the rest of it sitting at camp, eating ibuprofen, and reading a Jack Reacher novel on my phone. But I kept the story going, and in September, the story caught up with me. My cousin Delia called. Delia is 5 years older than me, and she occupies a specific role in our family. She is the one who decides what we're going to do about things. When Grandpa Rowan died, Delia organized the funeral. When my aunt's house flooded, Delia set up the GoFundMe and the volunteer schedule. She is competent in the way I used to pretend to be, except she actually follows through. I need you to lead a hunting trip, she said. Okay, I said, because I always said okay to Delia. Everyone did. The situation was this. Her husband, Marco, had been diagnosed with a recurrence of lymphoma in July. He'd beaten it once, 5 years earlier. Now it was back, and the prognosis was less optimistic. Marco was 41, had 2 kids, coached Little League, and was the kind of man who dealt with fear by refusing to sit still. He wanted to go hunting before his second round of chemo started. Not a day trip, a real trip. Deep woods, multiple days, the kind of thing he could hold in his mind during the months of treatment ahead. He won't go with just me, Delia said. He wants a group. He wants it to feel like something. And he specifically asked for you, because he thinks you're the one who knows what he's doing out there. There it was, my little mythology, calling in its debts. Where? I asked. He wants to go to the Allegheny, the national forest up in Pennsylvania. His grandfather used to take him when he was a kid. He's been talking about it for weeks. I had never been to the Allegheny National Forest. I had never led a hunting trip anywhere. I had been on exactly 2 hunts in my life, both with my Uncle Ray when I was 19, both in managed game land in southern Indiana, and on neither occasion had I actually killed anything. I carried a rifle competently. That was the extent of it. How many people? I said. 6, including you and me. Marco, obviously. His brother Noel. My friend Pauline. And I was thinking your brother. Davis won't come. He's got the restaurant. I already asked him. He said yes. So it was decided without me deciding anything, which was how things went with Delia. My job was to be the figurehead, the outdoorsman, the planner, the man with the expertise. All I had to do was maintain, for 5 days in the Allegheny National Forest in late October, a lie I'd been telling for a decade. I spent 3 weeks preparing. I watched YouTube videos about elk patterns in the Alleghenies. I read forum posts on Pennsylvania hunting regulations until my eyes ached. I bought a new GPS unit, a better first aid kit, and a set of topographic maps that I studied with the desperation of a student cramming for a final. I renewed my hunting license. I sighted in my rifle at a range outside Louisville and discovered that I was, at least, still a decent shot. That was something. I told myself it would be fine. People led hunting trips all the time. The terrain wasn't extreme. We'd have GPS and satellite phones, and a vehicle at the trailhead. I wasn't guiding an expedition into the Amazon. I was taking 5 adults into a national forest in Pennsylvania for less than a week. The worst that could realistically happen was that we wouldn't see any game, and Marco would be disappointed. I need you to understand that I believed this completely. I need you to understand that I was a man who had confused preparation with competence, and I walked into those woods genuinely thinking that the only thing at risk was my reputation. We arrived on October 22nd. 2 vehicles, Marco and Delia and Noel in Marco's truck. Me, Davis, and Pauline in my Jeep. The drive up from Louisville had taken 8 hours, and we were all stiff and punchy and glad to be out of the cars. I want to describe these people to you, because they mattered. They mattered to each other, and they mattered to what happened, and I won't reduce them to roles. Marco was tall and had lost weight since the diagnosis, but he carried himself like he was daring you to notice. He laughed easily and loudly, and it was not a performance. He was genuinely a man who found things funny, even now. Especially now, maybe. He had a way of grabbing your shoulder when he talked to you, and the grip was still strong, and I think he needed you to feel that. Delia, I've described, but I should add, she was scared. Not of the woods, of the reason we were there. Every time she looked at Marco when he wasn't looking back, her face did something she would have hated if she'd known it was visible. She'd brought a flask of good bourbon and a paperback novel, and her grandmother's 30-30 lever action, and she intended to use all 3. Noel was Marco's younger brother by 2 years, and he was the opposite of Marco in almost every way. Quiet, compact, precise. He worked as an electrician in Allentown, and he was the only one among us who actually hunted regularly. He knew this. He deferred to me publicly and watched me privately with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not hostility. Something more like measurement. Davis, my brother, was 30 and had recently opened a small restaurant in Bloomington, Indiana, that was either going to succeed or destroy him financially. He was here because Delia had asked, and because he loved me in the exasperated, clear-eyed way of younger brothers who know exactly who you are. He'd brought his old Remington 700 in a cooler full of food he'd prepped at the restaurant, venison chili, cornbread wrapped in foil, a container of braised short ribs that he said would be better on the second night. He was the best cook I knew, and the most quietly observant person in the group, and he was the one I was most afraid of, because he was the one most likely to see through me. Pauline was Delia's best friend from nursing school. She was 40, black, originally from Philadelphia, had been hunting since she was 12, and had exactly 0 patience for anything she perceived as masculine posturing. She was also the funniest person I'd met in years. Within the first hour of the drive, she'd made me laugh so hard I had to pull over, recounting a story about a date who'd tried to impress her by field dressing a rabbit and had fainted into his own kill. She was here because Delia needed someone who wasn't family, and because Pauline was the kind of friend who showed up for the hard things without being asked twice. We parked at a trailhead off a forest road about 14 miles south of the reservoir. The plan, my plan, assembled from YouTube and forums and maps, was to hike in about 4 miles to a ridgeline I'd identified as promising habitat. We'd set up a base camp, hunt the draws and hollows below the ridge for 3 days, and hike out on the 4th morning. 4 miles in with full packs? Noel said, looking at the trailhead sign. He didn't say it like a challenge. He said it the way you'd confirm a measurement before cutting. The terrain's moderate for the first 2 miles, I said, because I'd memorized the contour lines. Gets steeper in the last section, but it's manageable. Noel nodded. Marco clapped me on the shoulder. Let's go, he said. Daylight's burning. The walk-in was beautiful. I want to say that clearly, because what came later has a gravity that pulls everything toward itself, and I won't let it swallow this. The first 2 hours in the Allegheny were genuinely beautiful. The leaves were past peak but still holding color rust and amber and a deep, winey red that caught the afternoon light and held it. The trail followed a creek drainage uphill through hemlock and beech, and the air smelled like cold water and decomposing leaves, and the faintly sweet, mushroomy scent of a forest getting ready for winter. Marco walked point and kept stopping to look at things. A shelf fungus the size of a dinner plate, a salamander under a rock, a view through a gap in the canopy that showed the next ridge blue and hazy in the distance. And every time he stopped, he'd turn back to us with this expression of naked, unguarded pleasure, and Delia would look at him with that face she didn't know she was making, and I'd feel the whole trip tighten around its secret purpose, which was not hunting at all. We reached the ridgeline at 4:30. The campsite I'd chosen from the map was a relatively flat bench just below the ridge crest, sheltered from the west wind by a stand of mature red oak. It was better than I'd hoped. Noel looked around, said, "Good spot," and I felt a rush of relief so intense it embarrassed me. We set up camp in the last light. 3 tents, Marco and Delia, Noel and Davis, me and Pauline. Pauline had said, "I'm not sharing a tent with any of these married people, so you're stuck with me." Louisville. And that was that. Davis got a fire going with a competence I envied and started heating the venison chili. Pauline produced a bottle of rye whiskey. Marco sat on a log and looked at the fire and looked at his wife and looked at the darkening trees and said, "This is exactly right." We ate well. We drank moderately. We talked the way people talk around a fire when they're tired and comfortable and not yet afraid of anything loosely, stupidly, with long digressions and bad jokes and the kind of overlapping interruptions that mean everyone feels safe. Pauline told another dating disaster story. Noel, who'd been silent most of the day, turned out to have a dry, devastating wit that emerged only after his second cup of whiskey. Marco and Delia argued about whether their son Mateo was old enough for a hunting trip. He's 9. He's a mature 9. There's no such thing as a mature 9. Marco. Davis talked about the restaurant, and I heard in his voice the terror and exhilaration of someone who has bet everything on a single outcome, and I envied him that too, the willingness to risk, rather than to merely pretend. We turned in around 9:30. The woods were loud with the sounds of a forest at night wind in the canopy, the settling and creaking of branches, something small moving through the leaf litter near the tents, normal sounds. Pauline fell asleep immediately. I lay in my sleeping bag and listened to the forest and thought about the morning, running through my plan for the hunt, where to position people, how to work the draws, what to do if we actually got something, and fell asleep, still rehearsing. I woke at some point in the deep middle of the night, not gradually. One moment I was asleep, and the next I was completely, electrically awake, with my heart pounding and no clear reason for it. Pauline was awake too. I could hear it in her breathing, the held, controlled breath of someone listening hard. "You hear that?" she whispered. I listened. Wind, the trees, the distant sound of the creek below the ridge. And then, under all of it, something else. It's difficult to describe, and I've thought about how to do it for a long time now, and I think the best I can manage is this. It sounded like a voice that was almost a voice, like someone speaking words in a language you should recognize, just slightly too far away to resolve into meaning. It rose and fell with a cadence that felt deliberate, not mechanical, not random, but shaped, the way human speech is shaped, with emphasis and pause, and something that might have been emotional inflection. It came from below us, down in the hollow east of the ridge. "That's not an animal," Pauline said. Her voice was flat and certain. "Could be an owl," I said, "or a fox. Foxes can sound." "I've heard foxes. That's not a fox." We listened for another minute. The sound continued, rising and falling, never quite resolving into words. never quite abandoning the pretense of being words. Then it stopped. Silence. Full, total silence. The kind where you suddenly realize the background noise of insects and wind has dropped out, and the absence is louder than any sound. Then the trees started again, and the insects, and whatever small thing was living near our tents, resumed its rustling, and the night rebuilt itself around the gap. "Go to sleep," Pauline said, to herself as much as to me. "We're hunting in the morning." Morning was cold, clear, and normal. Frost on the tents, breath visible. Davis was already up and had coffee going on the camp stove, and the smell of it cut through the cold air like a declaration that the world was solid and functioning and made of ordinary things. I didn't mention what Pauline and I had heard. Neither did she. In the daylight, it was easy to file it under weird woods noise, probably nothing the category that exists specifically, so that people can continue with their plans. I laid out the hunting strategy over breakfast, trying to sound like I was recalling experience rather than reciting research. We'd work the east-facing draws below the ridge in pairs, moving slowly downhill, using the terrain to funnel any deer toward natural choke points. Marco and Noel together, Davis and Pauline, Delia and me. "You're putting the two worst hunters together," Delia said, meaning her and me. "I'm putting the team leader with the person who has the best rifle," I said, pointing at her grandmother's lever action. "Smooth," Pauline said. "Untrue, but smooth." We split up at 7:15. The plan was to hunt until noon, reconvene at camp, and go out again in the late afternoon if conditions were right. Delia and I took the southernmost draw, a steep crease in the ridgeline thick with mountain laurel and hemlock. It was hard walking, and we weren't quiet enough. I knew that, even with my limited experience. We were snapping branches and breathing heavily and having the kind of whispered conversation that isn't really whispering at all. "He's weaker than he's letting on," Delia said. About 40 minutes in. She said it without preamble, as if we'd been discussing it all along. "The hike in yesterday. Did you see him at the end? He was gray. He was gray. He looked fine to me. Because you don't know what he looked like before. He's lost 22 pounds since July. He doesn't eat. He pretends to eat, he moves food around, and talks a lot so you don't notice." Davis noticed. I saw Davis watching him at dinner. Davis notices everything. "I know. It's the most annoying thing about your family." She stepped over a fallen log and paused to scan the timber below us. "I need this trip to be good for him. I need him to have something to remember when it gets bad. Can you understand that?" "Yes." "Good. So let's find him something to shoot." We didn't. By noon, Delia and I had seen one doe at distance and nothing else. Back at camp, the reports were similar. Marco and Noel had jumped a small buck, but couldn't get a shot. Davis and Pauline had seen nothing at all, but had, by their account, spent an enjoyable morning in the woods and were not bothered. "The deer aren't moving," Noel said. He said it neutrally, but he was looking at me when he said it, and I felt the implicit question. "Did you pick the wrong spot?" "Pressure might push them later in the afternoon," I said. "We'll try the north draws." "Or the hollow to the east," Marco said. "I saw a good sign down there this morning. Rubs, scrapes, a trail beaten flat. The hollow to the east, where the voice had come from." "I didn't plan for that area," I said. "I don't know the terrain." "It's a hollow," Marco said, grinning. "Goes down and then comes back up. I think you can handle it." Everyone laughed, including me. We went east that afternoon. The hollow below the east side of the ridge was different from the draws we'd hunted in the morning. Wider, flatter at the bottom, with a creek running through it, and a thick canopy of hemlock that blocked most of the light. It was darker down there even at 2 in the afternoon, and cooler, and the air had a stillness to it that felt, I'm going to say, intentional, even though I know that's not a word that applies to air. It felt like the kind of quiet that was being maintained rather than simply existing. Marco had been right about the sign. There were rubs on nearly every sapling, fresh ones, the bark still pale and wet where antlers had shredded it. Scrapes in the ground every 30 yards, the earth turned over and musky, a trail along the creek bank that had been walked so frequently it was a trench. "Something big is using this hollow," Noel said. He was kneeling by a scrape, touching the earth. "These are from today, maybe this morning." "Then let's set up and wait," Marco said. His face was lit up. The grayness Delia had described was invisible now. He looked like a man who'd been handed exactly what he needed. We spread out along the creek, Marco and Noel on the east bank, behind a deadfall that gave them a clear shooting lane north along the trail. Davis and Pauline, 50 yards south, watching a secondary trail that branched off toward the creek. Delia and I farther south still, at the edge of where the hollow narrowed and the hemlock gave way to open beech forest. We waited. Hunting, when you're actually doing it, is mostly waiting. It's an exercise in voluntary stillness, and I was bad at it. My mind wandered. My legs cramped. I shifted and fidgeted and drew a look from Delia that could have cured leather. An hour passed. The light began to thicken and go amber, the way it does in a deep canopied forest in late afternoon. And the shadows between the hemlocks elongated and merged, and the hollow became a place of layered dimness in which movement was difficult to distinguish from the natural sway of branches. It was in this light, or this absence of light, that I heard it again. The almost voice, the not quite words, rising from somewhere deeper in the hollow, north of where Marco and Noel were positioned, muffled by the hemlocks but unmistakable in its cadence. Rising, falling, pausing, speaking. I looked at Delia. She was staring north, her rifle half raised, her head tilted at the angle of someone trying to tune in a weak radio signal. "What is that?" she murmured. "I don't know. It sounds like someone talking." "I know. Should we—" A sharp crack from the north. Then another. Rifle shots, 2 of them, fast. The reports flattening and echoing off the hollow's walls. Then Marco's voice, whooping, unmistakable. The sound of a man who has just experienced something he will remember for the rest of his life, however long that turns out to be. "He got one," Delia said, and she was already moving, and the voice, the almost voice, was gone, swallowed by the echoes and the sound of people crashing through brush toward each other. And in the excitement I let myself forget it again. Marco had killed a buck, a good one, an 8-point whitetail, healthy, heavy-bodied, down clean, with 2 shots. He was kneeling beside it when we reached him, one hand on its neck, and he was crying, not sobbing, just tears running freely down his face while he smiled, and nobody said anything about it because there was nothing to say. Noel was standing behind him with his hand on Marco's shoulder, and Delia walked up and put her arms around both of them, and Pauline and Davis and I stood slightly apart and let them have it. "Okay," Marco said finally, wiping his face with his sleeve. "Okay, who knows how to field dress this thing? Because I have absolutely no idea. Noel did, Pauline did, I sort of did, from videos. Davis, the cook, had the best knife. Between the 4 of us we managed messily, laughingly, with Pauline providing commentary. "That's the liver, Davis. Not the, that's the liver. Put it in the bag." And Marco, sitting on a log, giving useless directions, and Delia taking photos on her phone. It took over an hour, and it was disgusting, and it was one of the best hours of my life. I want to say that because it's true, and because the truth of it matters for what came after. We were happy. All 6 of us, in that darkening hollow, with blood on our hands and the smell of the kill in the cold air. We were happy. We hauled the deer back to camp in shifts, using a pole carry that Noel rigged. It was full dark by the time we had it hung from a tree branch at the edge of camp, and we were exhausted. And Davis reheated the short ribs, and we ate them with the last of the cornbread and drank whiskey and celebrated. Marco sat close to the fire and ate, really ate, Delia told me later. The first time in weeks, and told the story of the shot 3 times, each time with minor embellishments, and nobody stopped him because nobody wanted to. Around 10 o'clock, The fire burned down to coals, and the conversation softened into the drowsy, disconnected murmurs of people nearing sleep. Davis and Noel turned in first. Then Marco and Delia, Marco moving slowly, leaning on her slightly, the day's exertion finally showing in his posture. Pauline and I stayed by the fire. "We're going to talk about it now," she said. "Talk about what?" The voice. "From last night. And from this afternoon, don't tell me you didn't hear it again, because I saw your face from 50 yards away." I poked the coals with a stick. "I heard it. Do you know what it is?" "No." "Do you have a theory?" "No." "Good. Because I have a theory, and I don't like it." She pulled the whiskey bottle from beside her and took a sip and handed it to me. "My grandmother grew up in Allegheny County, about 40 miles south of here. She used to talk about something in these woods. She called it the caller. Unimaginative, but she wasn't a poet. She said it was a voice that came out of the deep hollows at certain times of year, fall, mostly, during the killing season. She said it mimicked, not words, exactly, the shape of words, the rhythm of a conversation. She said it sounded like someone you should be able to understand, and the longer you listened, the more you felt like you almost could." "What did she say it was?" "She said it was something that was hungry and patient, and it lived in the space between what you heard and what you thought you heard. She said it pulled people in by making them curious, not scared curious. She said the danger wasn't that it threatened you. The danger was that it interested you." I took a drink and passed the bottle back. "Do you believe that?" "I believe my grandmother wasn't a liar and wasn't crazy. I believe I heard something last night and today that I can't explain. I believe that we're in the woods with a man who has cancer and two people who love him so much they'd walk off a cliff if they thought it would help, and I believe that makes us a group of people who are already emotionally compromised in ways that could affect our judgment." She paused. "I also believe it might just be some weird acoustics and an owl." "That's quite a range of theories." "I contain multitudes. The point is, if you hear it again, don't go toward it, and make sure nobody else does either. That's your job. You're supposed to be the leader." She said it without malice, but the word "supposed" landed like a dart. She didn't know I was faking, but the word knew. I heard it that night. We all did. This time it was closer. Not in the hollow, but on the ridge itself, south of camp, moving or seeming to move through the trees with a slow, wandering trajectory, like someone walking and talking to themselves. The cadence had changed. It was faster now, more animated, with what sounded like emphasis and repetition, and I swear there were moments when I could almost resolve individual syllables. Not words, but the components of words, the shapes that a mouth would make. It went on for 20 minutes. I lay rigid in my sleeping bag, and beside me Pauline was equally rigid, and I could hear small sounds from the other tents that told me no one was asleep. Then Davis's voice from his tent, quiet and clear. "Kev, what is that?" Not a question. An identification of a problem, addressed to the person theoretically in charge of solving it. "I don't know," I said. "Stay in your tents." "Was that a person? Noel? From the same tent?" "I don't know. It sounded like a person. It sounded like someone who needs help." "It didn't," Pauline said sharply. "It sounded like something that wanted you to think that. Stay in your tent." A silence. Then Marco's voice, from the third tent, slightly muffled. "Delia's got the 30 to 30, and I've got the Remington. If something comes into camp, we're covered. Everyone stay put." The voice, the caller, I was already thinking of it that way, continued for another few minutes. It drifted south, grew fainter, and was gone. The insects returned. The wind returned. The forest recomposed itself. Nobody spoke again. I don't think anyone slept. Morning. Cold, gray, overcast. No frost. The clouds had moved in overnight, and the air was damp and heavy with the promise of rain. Over coffee, We had the conversation I'd been dreading. Not about the voice, about me. It started with Noel. "I want to hunt the north side of the hollow today," he said. "There's a bench up there, about 300 yards from where Marco shot the buck. I saw fresh scrapes on it yesterday, big ones." "I was thinking we'd stay on the ridge today," I said. "Work the draws to the west. We hunted those yesterday morning and saw nothing. The wind was wrong. Today it's out of the northwest, which puts us—" "Kevin." Noel set his coffee cup down. "The deer are in the hollow. They're not on the ridge. They're not in the western draws. Everything we've seen, every rub, every scrape, every trail, is in the hollow or on the slopes above it. I've been hunting 20 years. The game is there." I looked at the group. Marco was nodding. Davis was watching me with that particular, careful attention that meant he was seeing more than I wanted him to see. Pauline's face was neutral. Delia was looking at Marco. "The hollow's fine," I said, because what was I going to say? I'm afraid of a noise we all heard and none of us can explain, and also I don't actually know what I'm doing. "Good," Noel said. "I'll take the north bench with Davis. Marco and Delia, you set up where you were yesterday. Kevin, you and Pauline push from the south and drive anything toward us." He'd taken over the plan. Smoothly, without aggression, simply by knowing what he was doing in a situation where I didn't. And everyone let him, because everyone could feel the shift in authority, the real thing, displacing the performance. I should have been relieved. Instead, I felt something hot and sour rise in my chest, and I recognized it as the specific shame of being exposed, and I hated Noel for a moment with a clarity that surprised me. Pauline touched my arm as we packed up our gear. "Hey, let him run the hunt. We have a different job." "What job?" "Listening." We entered the hollow at 8:30. The cloud cover made it darker than the previous afternoon, a permanent twilight under the hemlocks, the creek loud with overnight rain, the air thick and close and smelling of wet earth and hemlock resin. Everything was green and black and brown and dripping. Pauline and I moved south through the hollow's lower end, making deliberate noise to push deer north toward Noel and Davis on the bench. It was simple work walk, snap branches, talk at normal volume. The opposite of hunting. We were the beaters, not the shooters. Noel had assigned us the role that required the least skill, and he'd been right to. "You're spiraling," Pauline said, watching my face. "Stop it." "I'm fine." "You're embarrassed because Noel took over and everyone was relieved. Get over it. Nobody cares whether you're in charge. They care whether we're safe and having a good time. Marco got his deer yesterday. This trip is already a success. You did that. I didn't do anything. I picked a spot off a map. You showed up. You said yes when Delia called. You spent 3 weeks preparing so that a dying man could have a good trip, and he's having a good trip. That's not nothing. I'm not what they think I am, Pauline. She stopped walking, looked at me. Honey, nobody ever is. Do you think Marco doesn't know he's dying? Do you think Delia doesn't know that this trip is a goodbye rehearsal? Do you think Noel doesn't know that his brother is leaning on him to be strong so Marco doesn't have to be? Every single person on this trip is performing something. You're not special. I laughed. I actually laughed, out loud, in that dark hollow, and the sound bounced off the hemlocks and came back to me strange and distorted, and that killed the laugh immediately. Because the echo was wrong. My laugh had been a short bark, one syllable, sharp, percussive. The echo that came back was longer. It rose and fell. It had cadence. Pauline heard it too. She raised one hand, the universal gesture for stop, don't move, don't speak. We stood there. The creek ran. The trees dripped. And from somewhere north of us, somewhere between our position and where the others were set up, the caller spoke. It was louder now, much louder. Not the distant murmur we'd heard the past 2 nights, but a full, clear articulation, as if whoever, whatever was speaking, had moved to within 100 yards. The cadence was complex. Long phrases broken by pauses that felt like they were waiting for responses. Call and response. Conversation. As if it were talking to someone. Or as if it had learned from listening to us around the fire and was now replaying the pattern of human dialogue. North, Pauline whispered. It's between us and them. We need to warn them. If we yell, we might. She stopped. I don't know. I don't know what yelling does. Pauline, it's a sound. It's a weird sound in the woods. It's not. We don't even know what it is. Then go north. Walk toward it, right now. I didn't move. That's what I thought, she said. So we go around, west side, up the slope, above whatever it is. We get to the others, and we pull everyone out. We started up the west slope of the hollow. It was steep, and the wet leaves were slick, and I fell twice, and Pauline fell once, and neither of us made a joke about it. The caller's voice continued below us, filling the hollow with its not-quite language. And as we climbed, I heard something new in it, something I didn't want to hear. It was starting to sound like Marco. Not words, not his voice exactly, but the rhythm, the cadence of his speech, the way he front-loaded his sentences with emphasis, the way he paused before punchlines, the way his voice rose at the end of stories, the music of how Marco talked. That was what the caller was producing, a structural imitation, a fluency in the patterns of a specific human being. Pauline heard it too. I know because she started moving faster, and Pauline was not a woman who hurried without reason. We reached the ridgeline and turned north, half jogging along the crest, and I was scanning the hollow below for the others. I could see the creek, the deadfall where Marco and Delia had been positioned, the bench where Noel and Davis should be. Marco was standing in the middle of the creek. He was alone, knee-deep in the water, his rifle slung over his shoulder, his head tilted, his body oriented north toward the sound. He was listening with his whole body, the way you listen when someone is calling your name from a distance and you're trying to locate them. Marco, I shouted. He didn't turn. Marco. Nothing. The caller was still speaking below, its voice threading through the hollow, and Marco was following it, the way a fish follows a current, not through decision, but through the inability to feel the pull as separate from himself. Where's Delia? Pauline said. I scanned. South of Marco, near the deadfall, Delia was on her feet, moving toward the creek, but slowly, hesitantly, as if fighting something. Her rifle was in her hands and she was pointing it at the trees, and then lowering it, and then pointing it again, because there was nothing to point it at. There was only a sound, and you cannot shoot a sound. Delia! Pauline screamed. Delia, get him! Get Marco! Delia's head snapped up. She saw us on the ridgeline. Something in Pauline's voice cut through whatever the hollow was doing to her, and she turned and ran toward the creek and grabbed Marco's arm, and he pulled away from her not violently, but with the distracted irritation of someone interrupted in the middle of hearing something important, and she grabbed him again, harder, and this time she shouted something I couldn't make out, and he looked at her, and even from the ridge, I could see the moment his face changed, from absence to presence, the moment he came back. North side, I said. Davis and Noel. We ran. The ridgeline was uneven, and I caught my foot on a root and went down hard on my hands and kept going, and Pauline was ahead of me, faster, surer. The hollow curved east below us, and the hemlock canopy thickened, and I lost sight of the creek. The caller's voice was changing again. It was louder still, and now it was layered, multiple cadences overlapping, as if several people were speaking at once, or as if one voice was trying to reproduce a group conversation. The rhythm of Delia's decisive speech, the measured pauses of Noel's careful observations, the rapid, warm cadence of Davis, talking about food he loved. My brother's speech patterns, coming out of the hollow like a recording played on an instrument that had never seen a human throat. Davis, I screamed. Davis! Noel! A shot. Below and ahead, a single rifle report that echoed through the hollow and silenced the caller mid-syllable. Then Noel's voice, real and human and furious. "Kevin, get down here." We plunged off the ridge and slid down the slope, grabbing at trees, showering leaves, and burst onto the bench and found them. Davis was sitting on the ground with his back against a tree and his hands shaking. His rifle was across his knees. His face was white and his eyes were wide, and he was looking at Noel with the expression of someone who has been pulled back from a ledge. Noel was standing over him, his own rifle pointed downhill into the hollow, his jaw set. "He was walking toward it," Noel said. "I grabbed him, and he wouldn't stop. I fired in the air." "It was calling me," Davis said. His voice was thin and bewildered. It knew. It sounded like it knew me. It sounded like it was telling me something I needed to hear. I couldn't not. "You're okay," I said. I knelt beside him and put my hands on his shoulders, and his shoulders were trembling, and my hands were trembling too. "You're okay. We're leaving." "It's still down there," Noel said. "Listen." The caller had resumed, quieter now, wounded or cautious, its voice threaded through the hemlocks like smoke, but still there, still speaking its stolen rhythms. "We're leaving the hollow," I said. "Right now. West, up to the ridge, back to camp. We pack and hike out tonight." "The deer," Noel said. "Leave it. Kevin, there's 150 pounds of—" "Leave the deer, Noel." He looked at me. I looked back. Something in my voice must have been different, not the voice of a man performing authority, but the voice of a man who was terrified and was going to get his people out regardless of what it cost him, because Noel nodded. Once, sharply, and he pulled Davis to his feet, and we went up the slope. We gathered everyone at camp. Delia had Marco sitting on a log, wrapped in a jacket, drinking water. He looked confused and exhausted, as if he'd been woken from a deep sleep. "I could almost understand it," he said. "That's the thing. I could almost understand what it was saying. It felt like, if I just got a little closer, I'd hear it clearly, like a word on the tip of your tongue." "That's the trap," Pauline said. "That's the whole trap. The almost." "We need to go," I said. "Pack everything. We hike out now." "It's going to be dark in 2 hours," Noel said. 4-mile hike on a trail, in the dark, with someone who, he glanced at Marco, with heavy packs. "I can make it," Marco said. "You can barely stand up." "I can make it." "We have headlamps," I said. "We have the GPS. The trail is clear. I am not spending another night on this ridge." Delia stood. "He's right. Pack up. Now." We broke camp in under 30 minutes. Tents, stoves, sleeping bags, food, crammed into packs, without the careful organization of the hike in. I left the camp stove fuel canister. Pauline left her folding chair. Nobody cared. The hollow was still producing sound. We could hear it from the ridge line, muffled, distant, but continuous, as if the thing down there was still trying to hold a conversation with people who'd left the room. We started down the trail at 4:15, with maybe an hour of usable light. I took point. Noel took the rear. Marco walked in the middle, flanked by Delia and Davis, and he was struggling. His pace was slow, his breathing audible, and every few minutes he'd stumble. And Delia would steady him without comment. The chemo hadn't started yet, but the cancer was already having its way with him, and the day's events had taken whatever reserve he'd been running on. Pauline walked behind me. "How confident are you in the route?" she asked quietly. "Very," I said, and for the first time on this trip it wasn't a lie. I had memorized the trail. I had the GPS. I had the maps. The one thing I'd actually been good at, the preparation, the research, the obsessive homework of a man trying to compensate for missing experience, was the exact thing we needed now. I knew this trail. I might not know how to lead a hunt or read game sign or field dress a deer without a YouTube tutorial, but I knew the way out. We lost the light about 2 miles in. Headlamps on, single file, the trail a narrow corridor of light in a darkness that pressed close on every side. The forest was different at night, denser, closer, full of sounds that the daylight would have made navigable, but that the darkness rendered strange. Every rustle was a question. Every distant crack was a possibility. And then, about a mile from the trailhead, Marco stopped. "Listen," he said. "Don't," Delia said. "Don't listen. Keep walking." "No, Delia, listen. It's different." We all stopped, headlamps pointing in 6 different directions, cutting the dark into slices. The caller, behind us, on the trail, or near it. Its voice was different now, faster, more urgent, with a quality I hadn't heard before. Need. It sounded like something that needed. Something that was running out of whatever our presence had been giving it. And it was closer than it had been at camp. "It followed us," Davis said. His voice was very calm, which scared me more than if he'd been screaming. "Move," I said. "Fast. Stay on the trail. Don't stop. Don't listen." We moved. Marco was leaning on Delia and Noel now, one on each side, and they were practically carrying him, and Davis was behind them, walking backward every few steps to check the trail behind us. And Pauline was beside me, her rifle unslung, pointing it into the darkness the way Delia had pointed hers in the hollow at nothing. Because what do you aim at? The caller stayed with us. I could hear it slipping through the trees on our left, just beyond the reach of the headlamps, matching our pace. Its voice was doing something new, cycling through rhythms. Marco's cadence, then Noel's, then mine, then a rhythm I didn't recognize that might have been Pauline's, or Delia's, or Davis's, shuffling through them like cards, as if searching for the one that would make someone stop. "Don't listen," Pauline said, to all of us, to herself. "Don't listen, don't listen, don't listen." But I was listening. I couldn't help it. And in the cycling of stolen rhythms I heard something that froze my blood, in a way nothing else had. My own cadence, the way I spoke when I was performing. The confident, authoritative, fake voice I used when I was pretending to know what I was doing. The caller had it. It had my performance, my lie, and it was playing it back at me. And for one disorienting moment, I felt the pull. Marco had described the sense that if I just listened a little closer, I'd hear what it was really saying. I'd understand. I'd know. Pauline grabbed my arm, hauled me forward. My feet found the trail again. I hadn't even realized I'd stopped. "Quarter mile," I gasped. "Quarter mile to the trailhead." The caller was louder now, right at the edge of the trees, right at the boundary of the headlamp beams, and I thought I saw, but I won't say I saw, because I don't know, and I won't be another person claiming certainty about something that might have been terror and shadows and the desperately pattern-seeking machinery of a frightened human brain. I thought I saw movement, not a shape, not a figure, just movement, wrong in its geometry, as if the darkness itself had a grammar and something was speaking in it. Noel fired, not at anything into the air, the way he'd fired in the hollow, and the report was enormous, punching through the night, and the caller's voice shattered like glass, broke apart mid-syllable, fragmented, became for one horrible moment a dozen overlapping partial imitations of all of us speaking at once, and then stopped. Silence. We ran. Marco couldn't run, but we carried him, Davis and Noel with his arms over their shoulders and his feet barely touching the ground, and Delia ahead, clearing the trail, and Pauline behind with the rifle, and me in front, with the GPS, counting down the distance. 400 meters, 300, 200. And then I saw the trailhead sign in my headlamp beam, and the gravel parking area, and our vehicles sitting there, like artifacts from a world where things made sense. We loaded the trucks in under 5 minutes. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to coordinate. The urgency was its own language, and we were all fluent. I drove. Davis sat beside me, Pauline was in the back. In the rearview mirror, I could see Marco's truck behind us, Noel at the wheel, pulling out of the lot. As I turned onto the forest road, my headlights swept the tree line at the edge of the parking area. The trees were still. The forest was silent. And from somewhere deep in the dark, so faint that I might have imagined it, I heard a voice, my real voice, not the performance, but the scared, thin, honest voice that had said, "I'm not what they think I am," speaking the shape of words I couldn't quite make out. I drove. We stopped at a comfort inn outside Kane, Pennsylvania. It was 11:30 at night, and the woman at the front desk looked at us 6 people, muddy, wild-eyed, carrying rifles, and said, with the weary precision of someone who'd seen everything, "Hunters?" "Yes, ma'am," Delia said. "How many rooms?" 3. Checkouts at 11. We cleaned up. We ate vending machine food, Snickers bars, and Doritos and cans of Coke sitting on the beds in Marco and Delia's room. And it was not the venison chili or the braised short ribs, but it was the best meal I'd ever had, because we were eating it in a room with a lock on the door, and electric lights and walls that the outside couldn't get through. Nobody talked about the hollow until Marco said, "I'm sorry." Delia looked at him. For what? For not being stronger. For almost. He stopped. It wasn't that I wanted to go toward it. It was that I felt like it already knew me, like it already had the important parts. And if it already had them, then what was the point of... He stopped again. "It felt like dying," he said. "Like the early part, where you're still deciding whether to fight. It felt like that." Delia put her hand on the back of his neck. "You fought. You pulled me out." "Same thing." I looked at Davis. He was eating a Snickers bar with the methodical focus of a man who was choosing very carefully what to think about. He met my eyes. "You got us out," he said. "Noel did the hard part. Noel fired a gun. You knew the trail. You knew the distance. You made the call to leave when no one else was going to." He took another bite. "You were ready for this." "I wasn't ready for any of this. I'm not Davis. I'm not what I know," he said. "I've always known. You think I can't tell when my brother is faking?" He almost smiled. "You were ready anyway." Noel, from the other bed, said nothing, but he gave me a nod, the same sharp, single nod from the hollow, and in it I read something I hadn't expected. Respect. Not for the expertise I didn't have, for the decision I'd made without it. Pauline said, "I'm sleeping with the lights on, and nobody is going to say a word about it." Nobody did. We drove home the next morning. 2 vehicles, same configuration, bright October sunlight on the Pennsylvania Turnpike, the world aggressively normal. Marco slept most of the way. He started chemo the following week. It was brutal. It worked. Initially shrunk the tumors, bought time, made everyone use words like cautiously optimistic. Then it stopped working, and they tried something else. And that worked partially, and then it didn't. Marco died 14 months later, in December, at home, with Delia and Noel and the boys. Pauline was there. Davis drove up from Bloomington. I drove up from Louisville. We sat in the living room while the hospice nurse did what needed to be done, and Davis made food because that was what Davis did, and Pauline kept Mateo and the younger one, Julian, occupied with a card game that she appeared to be losing on purpose. After, when everyone was in the kitchen and I was alone in the living room, Delia came in and sat beside me. "He talked about the trip a lot," she said. "At the end. Not the hollow, the other parts, the walk-in, the deer, sitting by the fire. He said it was the last time he felt like himself." "I'm glad," I said, and meant it. He never told anyone else about the voice. Neither did I, or Noel, or Davis, or Pauline. I think we all decided separately that it was ours, that it stayed with us. "Yeah. What do you think it was?" I thought about it. I'd been thinking about it for 14 months. I had no answer, and I told her so. Pauline's grandmother called it the caller, Delia said. Pauline told me. She said it lives in the space between what you hear and what you think you hear. I think about that. I think it lives in the space between what you are and what you're afraid you are. I think it finds the gap and speaks into it. She was quiet for a moment. Marco's gap was that he was dying and he hadn't decided to fight yet. Yours was that you were pretending to be something you weren't. It used both. But you came out the other side. She looked at me. You stopped pretending, didn't you? I'm trying to. Good. He'd have liked that. She got up and went into the kitchen, and I sat in the living room and listened to the sounds of people I loved moving through a house made smaller by an absence, and I didn't hear the caller, and I didn't hear the almost voice, and the silence was just silence, and it was enough. I don't go into the Alleghenies. I hunt now, actually hunt, with Noel, who's become something I'd cautiously call a friend, but we stay in managed game land in southern Pennsylvania and Virginia. Nothing remote, nothing deep. Noel doesn't push it. He was there. He knows. Davis's restaurant survived. It's good. If you're ever in Bloomington, it's called Knowles, which confused me until Davis explained that he'd named it after the man who'd saved his life with a gunshot and a steady hand on a dark hillside. Noel was embarrassed. Davis didn't care. Pauline called me last month. She'd been talking to a friend who worked for the Forest Service in the Allegheny district, and the friend mentioned that they'd had 2 separate groups of hikers report unusual auditory phenomena in the eastern hollows in the past year. Voices, almost voices. One group had a member who walked off-trail toward the sound and had to be physically restrained by the others. They're filing it as possible auditory effects of unusual wind patterns through hemlock stands, Pauline said. Do you believe that? No. Do you? No. Then stay out of those woods. I intend to. I'm writing this because Delia asked me to. She said that if the Forest Service wasn't going to tell people, someone should. She said Marco would have wanted it out there. I told her that Pauline's grandmother had a rule about this, that talking about the caller was safe as long as you'd already heard it and come out, because the voice had already taken your measure and let you go. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if any of the rules or frameworks or theories we've layered over this experience correspond to anything real. I know what I heard. I know what it did to the people I was with. I know that it found the thing in each of us that was unfinished or unresolved or afraid, and it spoke in the shape of that thing. And it nearly took my brother and the best man I've ever known. And I know this. I was not the leader I pretended to be. I was not the outdoorsman, the expert, the guy with the plan. I was a man who had done his homework out of fear and vanity. And when the worst happened, the homework was enough, and the vanity wasn't. What saved us was Pauline's clarity, Noel's competence, Delia's grip on Marco's arm, and Davis's willingness to be pulled back from the edge by someone he trusted. What I contributed was this. I knew the way out, not because I was brave, because I was scared, and scared men study maps. If you're going into the Allegheny, stay out of the eastern hollows in October. If you hear a voice that sounds like it's almost speaking, it is. If it starts to sound like someone you know, leave. If it starts to sound like you, the you that you perform, the you that you pretend to be, the you that fills the gap between who you are and who you wish you were, run. Don't listen. Don't try to understand it. The caller doesn't want your body. It wants the distance between you and yourself. It lives there, and if you hold still long enough, so will you.